Hey guys, Stealth here. In this deck review I'm looking at a Norway General deck which was sent in by Democritus. It's a Norway unspecialized deck, so no specific armor, infantry or airborne specialization, and I don't think that any of those are viable for a Norwegian deck anyway. Personally, I think that a Norwegian deck is okay, you can work with it, but if you don't mind losing a couple of activation points, just switch to a Scandinavian deck right away, because you will lose some availability, you will be losing some activation points, but they have a much better overall deck. Anyway, this deck is supposed to be used in 4v4's general purpose, a lot of situations, as Democritus put it. So I'm going to look at this in a 4v4, capturing towns and defeating enemy armor. Although I think that the last part is going to be particularly tricky. Now I can be pretty brief about logistics. He has one command unit in the form of a rover KPV. You do get a very high amount of these. You get 8. That's because with Norway you get quite the availability bonus. So you don't have to worry about running out of CVs. What you do need to worry about is running out of armor on your CVs, because these things are unarmored. A better alternative would be to take the XA 186. You'll be paying 30 points more, but you get quite a bit of armor. 3 on the front, 3 on the side. And you still get an availability of 6, but they're more expensive. I still think that that's worth it, because it will mean that you don't have to bring in another CV as soon as you would if you were using the rover, because the rover is going to get sniped much more easily. So using the KPV, I think that we have a much more solid CV here. Then a FOB, the only logistics helicopter that's in here in the form of the AS-332, and some M621 logistics trucks. Nothing special here, it's the only things that you can pick. Now, moving on to infantry, and he went with quite a bit of shock infantry here in the Volkskamjäger 90. These used to be the elite operators or elite infantry, and that changed a little bit with the introduction of the FSK. The FSK are now the elite troops. With these Volkskamjäger you got the Eriks. He went with 2 groups of identical Volkskamjäger, and that's, I believe, well, it can work, but I also prefer to have some Carl Gustavs in there. Because the Carl Gustav, when you're using these guys in forests, are slightly faster to fire than, for example, the Eriks. Well, the Eriks will of course do a little bit more damage, 25 armor penetration versus 18. So what I would do here is take out 1 card and bring them back in, for example, the XA180 or the 186. This one has more armor, by the way, but loses amphibious capability. This one loses a bit of armor but has amphibious capability, and I think this one is the best for this deck because you want to have that flexibility. Then some RBS 70 Mark II, which is the AA unit. Unfortunately, you don't get a lot of good infantry AA. Now these guys aren't bad, but their HE damage is a bit low with only 4. I prefer AA infantry that has an AA value or an HE value of 5, because it means that you kind of have to, you will be taking down those hinds a lot faster. The range on these things I definitely like. 2800 meters is a great range, but their accuracy isn't that good. So keep in mind that you might need to fire more missiles than you'd like at the enemy, and that means that these guys are going to run out of ammo faster. So make sure you have these guys deployed in groups of 2, maybe even 3, and that way you should have enough infantry to take down helicopters pretty quickly. Next up, a card of Stormers, and these Stormers are also shock trained, so all of the infantry in here is shock trained or higher. And the Stormers carry or bring their nice infantry unit or their infantry fighting vehicle. The CV9030N has a lot of armor, 4 side, 3 top, 4 front, 3 side, 2 back and 2 top. Bushmaster 2 cannon mounted on top of it with a very high accuracy, a good range, pretty high armor penetration of 4 for an infantry fighting vehicle. HE power of 1, good rate of fire. Keep in mind that these things can run out of ammo because they only carry 300 rounds. If you see that happening, it's definitely worth rearming these things because they may not seem imposing, but they can definitely be a pain in the ass if you use them right. Then the last unit that I hadn't discussed yet is the FSK. A commando unit, really. You can use these in whatever role you like. They are good at pretty much anything. They can take down armor with their Erics at only a range of 1000. That's a bit unfortunate, but so be it. Accuracy 60%, armor penetration is 25. That's a good weapon. They got the LMG-3, which means that they can use this weapon when they are engaging other infantry in the same block. So you have a very solid anti-infantry fighting force here with both the LMG-3 and the C7, because this is an assault rifle, which means it's not going to take any penalties like a battle rifle would if you were to use it at close range. It has a high accuracy, high rate of fire, good suppression, even a stabilizer, and a stabilizer of 30% on a rifle isn't bad. Now, I know it's a bit of a weird thing to say that a rifle has a stabilizer, but what it means, of course, is that if you're moving with these guys, they can still more or less reliably, accurately fire off their C7. Now, the one unit that he doesn't have, and that is the ATGM infantry, is because there just isn't any ATGM infantry in here. You do have light infantry, and that's the one we have here. That's the Volkskamjäger. You got fire supports in the form of the Storm Engineer, which are guys who carry the Carl Gustaf M2 or the Erics. But with all the Volkskamjäger that are in here, we have enough of the Erics launcher, so we don't need any of the other units. Support-wise, let's see what he has. Unfortunately, you don't get a lot of options, in the sense that your SPOGs are very, very limited. And by that I mean the only real SPOG that you're getting, if you want to call it that, is the NM45. These things are dirt cheap, 15 points only. They carry an Oerlikon 20mm, which can be used against ground targets and air targets, and this is really what you're getting them for, of course, the helicopter range. Don't expect these things to survive for too long. Also, if you want to use them, make sure you split them up. If you don't, and if you have, for example, a group of 2 to 4 of these units, you spot one hind and the hind spots you, it's going to close in, it's going to fire off its rocket pods, and you have just lost 4 of these units. Better is to split them up in 2 groups of 2 to make sure you present less of a big target for that enemy hind or whatever other helicopter you're facing. Also keep in mind that an enemy helicopter is usually going to have a range of 2800 meters or 2600 on a lesser ATGM. That means that these things cannot take out the helicopter before the helicopter can take out them. But for this situation, I don't think it's that bad, because you are only spending 15 points on these guys. They're not that expensive. Now, other units that he has here are the NASAMs. Now, these are nice units. They are just ground-mounted MRAMs, and that means that they have a pretty good range, 2800 meters versus helicopters, 3.5k versus airplanes, good accuracy, decent amount of HE damage of 7. They carry 6 of these missiles and they're fire and forget, which is pretty unusual. It means that you can just fire 1 or 2 of these off and instantly disable the radar, which is something that you can also do with the NOAA, for example, but the difference with the NASAMs is that if the launcher gets destroyed, then the missile will still fly up to the target and possibly impact, depending of course on the amount of ECM and dodging capability of that pilot. Nice units to have. They are a prototype, so unfortunately we cannot have more of these. What we can have a lot of are NOAAs, and these NOAAs are 70 point, very high HE power AA missiles. Of course, it's just a usual Hawk. They just renamed it, tweaked some stuff. For example, the range is a little bit better than the American standard range. Good accuracy. They only carry 3 missiles though, you can see them right here of course. But the vehicle itself does not carry any extra ammunition. If you want to use these, and he has quite a high number of them, make sure that you keep them in groups of 2 or 3. Groups of 2 might be better, because these things are not mobile at all. They have an off-road speed of 25, which is possibly some of the lowest off-road speeds in the game. Keep in mind, some of the infantry in the game runs faster than this. They run at 30 kph. What I would do here is deploy them in groups of 2. As I mentioned, groups of 3 might be a bit much, because you can take quite a bit of artillery fire and lose an investment of up to 210 points if you have groups of 3. Also, something I'm going to do here is upvet these. I want to have 8 of them at hardened. I don't think that 6 of them at trained are that useful. I want to have these things hit whatever they're targeting. They do have a decent range against helicopters. It's not stellar, but it works. The alternative would be to use the NM195. This thing is a lot cheaper. You're only paying 25 points for this. And this one is much more geared towards taking down helicopters. But since the range on the NOAA is a lot better, I'm going to stick with the NOAA. Because the NOAA, if it hits a helicopter, it is usually going to go down very, very quickly. It's more likely to hit the helicopter. And it can also do the airplane roll, or the anti-airplane roll. Now the last unit he has in here is an M270, just a standard MLRS which fires cluster munitions, so you can do AP damage to the top of an enemy vehicle. That means that you will take out most vehicles quite easily. It also means that he does not have any howitzers or mortars in here. Now the howitzers aren't that good. The M109A3 is not a bad vehicle, but its dispersion is a bit high. Range is 24.5 kilometers. I would prefer it if that was a bit more, because it means that I might have to relocate this vehicle closer to the front line, and that's something that I don't really like to do. Because it means that if you do that, they're going to start to run out of ammo. And I prefer to have these things just circling my fob, just moving from location to location to prevent counter battery while they're still taking on fresh shells. He also does not have the NM106, which is the howitzer, the mortar. I'm considering getting these in, but I'm not sure for which unit, because I want to try and keep all of these in here. Now, since I won't be using this deck, I'm not going to bring in a mortar. I'm not going to change out the M270s, because I think that they will be needed for this deck, since the deck itself does not have any long-range AT capacity, or at least not yet. And that means that we will probably be needing the M270 to take out heavier armor, or at least weaken it. So let's move on to the tanks, and this is where you run into trouble. Norway, for some reason, has not updated their tanks, or they just didn't feel the need to. Now, by not updated, I mean they don't have any super heavies. I don't mean that the tanks themselves are old or bad, because that's definitely not the case. This Leopard 1A5 NO2, for example, is from 1995. Has very good accuracy, a good stabilizer, 17 armor penetration, which is pretty damn high for a tank that's worth 70 points. Rate of fire is good at 10 rounds a minute. Autonomy is good, of course, since it's a Leopard. It has 650 autonomy, 65 off-road and medium optics. Leopard 105NO, or 1A5NO, is the slightly older version. You're going to be paying a bit less for these guys. They are only 60 points instead of 70. They lose 1 point of armor penetration, a little bit of frontal armor, 12 versus 10, but otherwise they are just as capable tanks as the 105A2. Let's see, Leopard 1A1NOs. Yeah, this is the territory where you don't really need 34 of these tanks unless you're going to start spamming them, and spamming them is not something that I do in my decks. I don't think, though, that we have a lot of other categories where we can spend these points. So for now I'm going to delete them, have a look at if I can see opportunities for spending 5 points on other units. But if not, I'm going to revisit this section and get me some more tanks here. But I think that we can use this category to fill up the slots that I mentioned. He has Marine Jaeger in here, which are the sniper teams. Exceptional stealth, very good optics, off-road speed of a 30, which means that they run at 30 kph. Disable their weaponry. No matter how nice that sniper rifle may be, you do want to disable it to make sure that these guys don't give their position away. They're carried by the Bell 204. I believe that the Bell 412 is a bit better. The reason for that is that the Bell 204 has less autonomy, 300 versus 460. And even on the, or especially on larger maps, this is something that's going to be significant. Because sometimes those Bell 412s or 204s might not make it back. Next up is an NM116, which is pretty much a hugely updated chassis, dated back to 1975. Very good optics on this unit. Off-road speed could have been better, but 55 isn't bad. They got medium stealth, which is nice for a recon, of course, but all recon vehicles have this medium stealth to make sure that they are not going to be that easily killed off. Just an all-round decent scout vehicle. And then he has the AS-350, which is the only reconnaissance helicopter that we're going to get in this section. So the other unit that I want to have in here is the Panzerbill, and that's because recently I saw, I'm not sure who it was, it might have been Drazem on the Plungeon Valley map that I covered in one of my gameplays. He used these things to great success as a sort of infantry support vehicle. Their stats might be pretty terrible, in the sense that they only have 2 armor penetration, 2 HE damage, but they have a high rate of fire to make up for it. They carry enough rounds to keep up that fire for a while. Good off-road capacity, good optics, and yeah, I don't really see any other units that we can bring in here, so I might as well go with 2 of these. Gives you 22 of these units. They're very, very cheap. You can just throw them around, for example, operating together with your CV-3090s, covering Volkskamjäger as they move from building to building, and operating together with tanks, so that, for example, the 1A5 can take out vehicles such as tanks, whereas the Panzerbill can then go after the infantry and the vehicles as they start to appear. Next up, vehicles. He only went with the NM142 here, which is a high-end ATGM vehicle. As I mentioned, you don't really have any high AT capacity in your tanks, nor do you have the armor to stand up to enemy armor for very long. So we're going to have to use these guys to take out enemy armor quickly. They have a high armor penetration, high accuracy, and the standard range that you're used to from the TOW 2. The one thing I'm going to do is up-vet these to make sure that that accuracy gets even higher, because I want these things to hit, and we got the activation points to do it. Another option is the 151A2. It's also a TOW 2 vehicle. They are almost half the price of the 142, but they carry less missiles, and I'd prefer to have a little bit more missiles on them so I don't have to worry about resupplying these. You also got the TOW base version or recoilless rifles if you like those, but I think that for what we need, this one is definitely a lot better. Helicopters is unfortunately very, very empty, and that means that we cannot do any quick helicopter operations. I'm not sure why, but it seems that Eugene decided that Norway just does not need any helicopters, or that none are in service. I find the last thing to be pretty unlikely, but if you're an expert on the Norwegian military, please leave me a comment down below to tell me exactly how that is and what's going on there. Next up, Air Tab. You get a decent fighter here in the form of the F-16AM. This one has a couple of AIM-9L missiles for short-range dogfighting. They're nice and accurate. They have long-range MRAMs. Their ECM is not as high as you would expect from a high-end fighter, in the sense that they only carry 40%, not 50% like some of the better fighters in the game. Turn radius is 300, time over target is 90 seconds, so you can have these in the arena for 1.5 minutes. Speed is good, of course, yeah, what can I say, it's just a good fighter. The F5A Puff is an ATGM. It's a seaplane, and this seaplane has some decent range missiles. They are not the best. I would prefer to have these at a range of 4,900 meters to 5,600 or 5,200, which is pretty much the range of the Raven. Because 4,200 is going to put you in range of the enemy AA that you're going to try and take down, and that means that these guys are at risk. Their ECM though may not seem that high, but I have seen these things get out of pretty tight situations where they did a lot better than I had expected. Something that I also learned when using these things is not to underestimate those AIM-9Ls. It's a very slow plane, 750 kph only, And that means that these missiles have enough time to lock onto enemy helicopters. So what I have done is, for example, have 2 seaplanes at ready. I suddenly spot a helo rush and I send these things in. With those AIM-9Ls, they have a decent chance of taking down a couple of helicopters, or at least wounding them. And with their ECM value, which is still high enough, they have a chance to dodge enemy return fire if there's, for example, Mi-24V in there, which can fire some AA missiles at you. Next up, CF-104, which is the napalm bomber. That can be very brief. It's just carrying a couple of those big napalm tanks, 340 kilogram bombs, doing napalm over a pretty large area. The problem is survivability. 10% ECM means that this thing is not that likely to make it home if you don't clear the way with seed first. And then he has 8 starfighters in here. These starfighters carry a couple of nice cluster bombs, doing 6 armor penetration from the top. That's usually enough to defeat the top armor of an enemy tank or vehicle. But these things are not likely to survive because they use the same frame, the F-104, and they have 0% ECM. So these things are very, very likely to go down. Make sure that you escort these with a puff and or an F-16 AM to draw fire. With their 40% ECM and the 30% on the puff, you're very likely to deflect the missiles so that the starfighter can still manage to reach its target. Now he has 8 of these, and this is where I would make a change. While they are old, I have found that the F-5A Freedom Fighter, which is also what the F-5A Puff is based on, the F-5A Freedom Fighter with these 127mm rocket pods can be very, very annoying. And by that I mean that they fire off these rocket pods very quickly because they only carry 8 of those missiles in there. They don't have any ECM, as with most of the Norwegian Air Force. Speed's low, but you only need to get a couple of hits with these things in order to regain that 50-point value. Once you evac them and they get repaired and resupplied and rearmed, you're going to be spending, well, maybe up to 30 seconds before they're ready. These things have a very, very fast turnaround, and with a couple of these in my airfield, so in my in-game selector, I was able to pretty much have one out in the battle the entire time. Now the air tab, he went with a good setup for the Navy. Actually, he might have been copying one of mine, I'm not sure. Congo, 2 Lafayettes as escort for the Congo and to provide anti-ship missile fire with both the main gun and the exocets. LCUs to resupply, and a Donghae with dual Emerlek 30s to engage helicopters and airplanes at close range to the shore, since they have that coaster sailing. So he might have been copying this from me, I'm not sure, but this is definitely something that I will not change. This is something that you can really use to mess up an enemy navy. If you see too many Red Force ships though, if you're going up for example against a marine deck, you might want to bring in a Chamsuri instead of a Donghae, because a Donghae cannot help with the defense of these ships, while a Chamsuri has good seaways. So that's it for the review of this Norwegian General deck. As I said in the beginning, it might be better to switch back to Scandinavia, because that gives you a lot more options, and it still gives you the excellent infantry that Norway has to offer. So in this situation, personally, I would not play this Norwegian deck unless I wanted to have just a different deck from my usual Norred Air, for example. But otherwise, go with Scandinavia General, and you still have enough units and a lot more versatility. And for example, the 121 tanks that Sweden now has. Anyway, if you want to use it, the link or the deck code is in the description below. If you want to send me your deck, do so through the link in the description, and I'll be happy to look at it for you. Keep in mind though, I am cutting back a little bit on Wargame Red Dragon. I'm not sure when I'm going to stop entirely, because I'm really still waiting to get access to active aggression. I'm trying to get in contact with Eugen there. But we're going to see how that's going to turn out. So send it in and I'll have a look. Thanks for watching. Hope you liked the video. If you did, please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.